just to get the vocal cords warmed up, what I'd like to do is ask each of our panellists, perhaps starting with Ian, to give their preliminary thoughts on today's topic, Defence Made in Australia, how partnerships, joint integration and collaboration are building our sovereign capabilities. And there is a time limit, Ian.
Okay, thanks Matt. What a fantastic topic. My name's Ian Irving. I'm the Chief Executive of the Naval Shipbuilding College, and we absolutely epitomise Made in Australia. Our role is to ensure that our workforce is available for these fantastic projects that Julian mentioned, $90 billion worth of investment in naval shipbuilding across the country. And this really is a tremendous nation-building opportunity for us. Never before have we had a continuous shipbuilding plan. Never before have we had the opportunity of establishing an enterprise within this country to continuously build ships and submarines in the way that we're looking at now. For me, it's a really exciting period for myself. I started my career actually on the Collins program a long time ago. I've been coming to Adelaide for many, many years, and I know the kind of careers that can be developed through these programs, and it's an incredible opportunity for our young Australians to think about careers in this sector, and that's one of the things that's very pleasurable for me to be able to do, is to promote this sector, promote the opportunities that the country has, and indeed that individuals will have getting involved in these tremendously exciting programs. You know, the ships and submarines that we'll be building over the coming period will be some of the most sophisticated and complex machines developed on the planet. The submarine is akin to the complexity of a space system. It's as exciting, it's as challenging for the engineering and technical people to get involved in that, and to be involved in those programs will really set people up for their careers. Tremendous industry opportunities as well to get involved with the prime deliverers of the platforms that we'll be building, both here in South Australia and Western Australia, and indeed across the industrial base of the country, because the supply chains indeed will stretch out across the whole geography of Australia. So my role is quite central to that. We believe the Naval Shipbuilding College is a central core of the naval shipbuilding enterprise that the country is building. Our people will be the success of these programs, and we're tasked with ensuring we've got the right people in the right quantities at the right time to ensure that our corporate partners, our industry partners can succeed. So for me, a tremendously exciting opportunity. I hear a lot of kind of negativity around the press at times, around Australia's position and that. In the defence sector, let me tell you, it's never been as exciting as it is now. 90 billion in shipbuilding, 200 billion across the whole defence sector. This is an amazing time to be involved in engineering in Australia in defence.
Thanks, Ian. And we'll hear more about what NSC is doing in that in your role shortly. Julie, your thoughts on the lunch topic, please.
I think I've been working in the industry about 15 years, and Defence SA is, as most of you know, part of the South Australian Government. We're a department within the government. There's really been no better time to be working in this industry, not just in defence, but in the newer evolving industries of cybersecurity and space. I'd build on what Ian said around careers in this industry for young people, but we shouldn't also forget people transitioning for other industries, people who want to upskill themselves. We've got a challenge on our hand to lift the population's education to meet these really highly technical roles, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity. We've always been very passionate about defence in this state. We're not newcomers, and I think that the South Australian Government's working very hard at the moment to make sure that we maximise all of these opportunities. And I think collaboration, as you mentioned in the opening question, is going to be really, really important. So that's collaboration at all levels. That's collaboration across education and training providers to ensure that we've got the most highly qualified workforce. I think it's collaboration and co-opetition across industry between primes and SMEs and primes, SMEs and SMEs, certainly with companies that have never thought about working in this space before. So collaboration and cooperation is key. Our cooperation with other governments and the federal government also is going to be key to that. So, you know, we had a quiet industry there for a while, but I can see really exciting things happening.
Thanks, Julie. Chris, your thoughts, please, just as an opener.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and pleasure to be here, and it's great to see so many familiar faces out there in the audience today. When I think about the topic today, Matt, I come back to what our core mission is. And our core mission as an organisation and collectively up here today is to make the ADF successful, and that's central to everything we do. There's a lot of focus at the moment in terms of the $200 billion, and some of the numbers we're talking about spend in the industry and the things that are going on are huge and they're unprecedented. But we come back to why is it that we're doing what we're doing, and it's to make the ADS successful. And if I think about how we address that challenge, it's always been about partnership and collaboration. And they're two words that, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, you really can't escape. There's been a lot of chatter around what collaboration is. There's been a lot of talk about how industry is collaborating with each other, how we're collaborating with defence, but also how we're building that supply chain and widening that collaboration to include academic institutions and the like to try and achieve what we're seeking out to do. I'm the Chief of Future Business for BA Systems Australia. We've been in country here for over 70 years, and we're really proud of the way that we've collaborated over the journey. You know, we've got a supply chain of over 1,600 companies nationally, and we've worked very hard to sort of bring them into the supply chain and make sure that collectively we can meet the challenges that the ADF faces. So, as Ian said, it's a term that's been used quite a bit recently, but it is a really exciting time to be in the defence industry. There's so many opportunities for companies wishing to participate in that grand challenge, but also if we look to the future generation, I'm a father of 2 young children, the opportunities that are there for our children to participate in a sector that's going to be, you know, there around there for the next few decades is just fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. And I find it's warming to see one of Australia's largest primes, and it's good to see that you're talking about the interests of the end user,
Yep.
which of course is why we're in this industry. So thanks. And so Christopher, welcome. Your thoughts on joint integration, collaboration?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks to AmCham for putting on this part of their business series about defence and cybersecurity and space. And I'll be brief, and I should also recognise my former parliamentary colleague, David Ridgway, the Minister for Trade. It's a great announcement about Houston today, and again, kicking goals for South Australia at the state level. Look, what the government tried to do over the last 3 years is a couple of really critical, in fact, 3 really critical things. It tried to set up the architecture so that everybody knew across business, the states and territories, primes, overseas primes in particular, overseas governments, Department of Defence, the ADF, what our plan was, our architecture. So business can look at the Defence White Paper, the Integrated Investment Plan, the Naval Shipbuilding Plan, the Defence Industry Policy Statement, which set up the CDIC and the Innovation Hub and the Next Generation Technology Fund, the Defence Export Strategy, the Defence Capability Industrial Plan, which had the 10 sovereign capabilities that we wanted. And business can see in those documents what the government wants to achieve. So there's really no doubt about the direction in which the government is going. Often in business, people say they'd like to know what the government's plan is over the next 3 years, 10 years, whatever it might be. Well, in defence and defence industry, that plan is very available to anyone who wants to look for it. The second thing we did was put money behind it. So the $200 billion spend on our building up of our defence capability, the largest in our peacetime history, is a locked-in spend over the next 10 years. So the Defence Minister and the Defence Industry Minister aren't going back to the ERC every 6 months and year asking for money to prove that they are getting the job done. That is locked in, and that's really, really important. And the third thing we did was we made decisions so that the contracts have been signed on the biggest projects in Australia's defence history, whether it's the submarine project, the attack class submarines, the Hunter class frigates, the combat reconnaissance vehicles being built by Rheinmetall, the surface-to-air missile defence system being built by Raytheon are some of the most well-known ones. Of course, there's a myriad other ones that when you're the Defence Minister, you think $500 million doesn't sound like a very big project because you're dealing with projects that are $50 billion or $35 billion. But of course, there's a lot of those 80, 100, 200, 500 million dollar projects which are critical for our state and our nation's future. So we put the money in, we made the decisions, we established the architecture. But the message I would give to small and medium enterprises, which in the defence space is really where we are our largest in Australia.
Actually, Christopher, can I cut you off there, because that was a really good intro. And
Okay.
I think you're leading in to answer my next question. So
I was told I had 3 to 5 minutes.
I think that was when you were a minister. As a minister,
I'm not used to being cut off, David. What do we do now?
Cut you off. But look, those numbers, most of us are very familiar with those numbers. $200 billion, that these are nation-building contracts, $100 billion being spent in South Australia, much of that being invested into Australian industry. I think you can take a lot of credit for that. Heavens knows you do. But
Well, with good reason.
so what I want to ask you is, what do we as an industry have to do now to make sure that's a successful legacy? So probably the worst case scenario is we finish up with 12 submarines, nine frigates, 12 OPVs and so forth, but not have an Australian sovereign industrial capability to support those platforms. What does the industry have to do now over the next 20 years to ensure that that is a successful legacy?
Well, I'd be interested to hear what Chris thinks about that as well. But look, to me, and my next point was going to be, if I was advising...
Can you answer the question, please?
I am. Small and medium enterprises, I would be saying to them, it's all about capability. It's no good SMEs saying we're not winning the contracts with the large primes and therefore the government's policy is a failure. If the SMEs cannot deliver the same capability that a BAE or a Naval Group or a Lursen or a Rheinmetall can get in their own supply chains, then they won't win those contracts. And it'll be no good saying, we didn't win the contract, the government's a failure. It's all about capability. So it's all about SMEs investing in their research and development, but also their people and their processes, their equipment, to make sure that when Naval Group is criticised by the government or whomever it might be for not delivering a contract to a particular business, Naval Group or BAE won't be able to say, well, we'd love to have used X, but unfortunately X wasn't as good as the one that we've been using in Glasgow or Cherbourg. And I mean, I know that all these businesses that have won these big contracts want to deliver their AIC. They want a 60% local build. That's what we've defined a local build as being, and they've all completely signed up to that. But the ADF must get the best capability. That's the only requirement. Everything else flows from that. So you'll never get a defence minister or a prime minister who will defend a second-rate product, because the ADF must win in the field.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So that's a good segue to Chris in terms of what BAE Systems is doing. Of course, you need to fulfil your contract and deliver 9 Hunter-class anti-submarine warfare frigates. And you said you've got 1,600 companies in your supply chain. So what are you doing both to continue building BAE Systems as a success story in Australia, but also equally importantly, building that capability within your supply chain as you deliver those ships?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt. And just to sort of follow on from what Christopher was saying, one of the real changes in the sector over the past 5 or 6 years in particular has been there's a real cultural shift. I think there's that realisation that for such a generational investment in capability, there needs to be a social and economic dividend, and that comes through the development of sovereign capability. We work really closely with the supply chain in terms of making them aware of what the opportunities are. I said earlier that we had a head start effectively. We've been here for 70 years. We already had a supply chain that was 1,600 strong. But we're leveraging that to sort of build, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of making those companies aware of the opportunities on the Hunter program, but also the broader programs. We have 200 projects with the ADF, so there's a wide range of opportunities there. And we have dedicated teams within both the Hunter program, but also our Global Access program, whose sole role is to identify opportunities for small to medium enterprises to supply to us, but also to supply into our global supply chain, which is over $18 billion annually. So there's huge opportunities there, and part of that discussion is around not only making them aware of the opportunities, but helping them understand what it takes to meet the capability requirements that Christopher talked about. So on Hunter alone, just as an example, we've run numerous sort of capability roadshows across the nation. We've already got 900 companies pre-qualified to supply into the Hunter program, which is a fantastic start. And some of those companies have already gone on to be supplying into the Type 26 program in the UK, because we're not only just talking about Australian opportunities now, we're trying to build a globally competitive Australian defence sector. And that means there's opportunities for companies not only to supply into the Hunter frigate program here, but back into the UK Type 26 program, and we've also got the Canadian program for another 15 ships. So that discussion and that maturity of relationship that builds up over numerous programs really is the most pleasing thing to see from my perspective. You see the depth of those relationships, and then the discussions you're having around the opportunities continues to evolve, and we're really starting to see that momentum in the sector as a result.
Thank you. Julie, I'll get to you in a sec about what's happening elsewhere in the state, but Ian, so Chris has just talked about the industrial base and his supply chain. Your area is more in skills development and ensuring we've got the right skills to feed those projects and those companies. So could you tell us a bit, please, about what is the Naval Shipbuilding College doing to make sure that those supply chains and those primes have the right skilled personnel?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really what we're all engaged with. We're partnering with our industry stakeholders here to ensure that we can understand their demand signals in terms of the workforce that they need into the future, and that's both at the prime level and the SME level, across the board, from the tech trades jobs right through to the PhDs. So that we've got a very good understanding of the skills that are needed to succeed with these programs. So we're developing those partnerships. We're also developing partnerships with academia to ensure that we've got good conduits and channels to market for the kind of people that will come into this sector. And again, from the TAFE colleges through to the universities, in the geographies that are required. So we're partnering with education and training providers both at the Commonwealth level, the state level and the private level. We're getting an understanding of the supply and the capacity that they can provide us, and identifying where we need to make market interventions to either increase the supply and the capacity that's available, and indeed boost the calibre of the education offerings that are being offered, so that we know that the students and candidates coming through will be job ready when they enter the companies that we're talking to. So there's a raft of activity going on right around the country right now with 26 suppliers of education and training opportunities, to work with them to effectively endorse their courses, so that we will all know as a community that candidates coming through those courses will be at the requisite level, that we can then provide some very specialised shipbuilding simulation training and provide them to industry in a very effective job-ready way. We're also looking at how we promote the sector, because people need to understand that these jobs exist and that these careers exist. So another big piece of what we're doing is outreach to the community, to getting into the schools. And when we look at the length of these programs, we're talking to the Year 8s and Year 9s that are going to be central to the success of these programs as they come through TAFE colleges and as they come through universities, both of which are absolutely necessary to the companies. So really working hand in glove with our main companies to really understand their talent acquisition strategies, how they're going to be delivered, and then helping deliver them. So we're working very much, collaboration and partnership is everything that's central to us with our stakeholders.
Thank you. So Julie, Defence SA is the exemplar really of it around Australia in terms of how a state government creates a defence agency. You've been around for 30 years, since the 80s, and the development of Osborne and Techport. We've got the big projects. We've got frigates, submarines, OPVs, UAVs, Jawn and so forth. We've got the beginnings of a very good skills strategy. We've got a solid supply chain in the state, handful of primes, not many mediums, and dozens of SMEs. Isn't it sort of job done for you guys? You've done the investment attraction. We've got the big projects. You guys must just walk around the office patting yourselves on the back every day.
We wish.
The question is, I guess, what's next for Defence SA? I guess space is one of the obvious answers to that, to part of the question. But keen to know what's happening for the next decade for Defence SA, please.
I think we've still got a big role to play in these shipbuilding projects, and we're seeing that play out daily. So working collaboratively with the federal government, particularly on skills issue, which is really my areas of expertise, with NSC, with CDIC, with the Naval Shipbuilding Office, to make sure, because the state is responsible for vocational training, that the apprenticeship programs, etc., that we're running through Skilling South Australia have a viable outcome for the programs. Still supporting SMEs and primes with supply chain activities. I won't go deeply into these, knowing I have a time limit. And so we're very much there, still attending those trade shows, getting out to support the DTC, etc. So there's still a lot happening in the supply chain space. What I've seen change in the agency in the last 12 months, and it's been really exciting to be part of, is we're becoming a bit of a pivotal point for government as a whole to start to support the defence industries from other departments. So acting as a conduit, for instance, for the defence industry skills strategy has been really important to informing other South Australian departments about what defence industry needs. So working with TAFE, working with the Department of Innovation and Skills, working with the Department of Education to make sure that everybody's across these possibilities and working together to support South Australian industry. Space at AI, cybersecurity, I mean, these are the really exciting things that people want to hear about. We're doing very similar things in some ways for space that we have done historically for the defence industry. So, you know, being such a fledgling industry, there are a lot of really exciting SMEs out there who we're working very closely with. The Space Agency is settling in here, and we're supporting them in exploring the new ways that the South Australian Government and the Australian Government Agency will work together. AI is exploding, cybersecurity is an interesting new topic for SMEs, and providing that education piece for entering supply chains and what those new cybersecurity requirements are is really important. Big data collection is the next big thing too. We've got platforms coming into Edinburgh like P8s and Tritons that will just generate enormous amounts of data, and that data needs to be managed, and that workforce is going to be a combination of uniformed and ununiformed people, and there is a whole new skill set there, or a much more evolved skill set that's going to be needed there. So they're just some of the things.
Thank you.
I could go on, but...
No. Probably a question to Christopher and Chris. So we've talked about the platform acquisition and the capability, but along with that, in parallel really, is research and development. So Christopher, initially, that policy framework that you put in place, could you tell us a bit about, please, how that will deliver that deep research and development capability within Australia in parallel with delivering ships and submarines?
Well, that's a great question. So when we first put together the white paper and the integrated investment plan and the ambition to create more of a defence industry than we already have, because we already have some defence industry, we also recognised that the small and medium enterprises won't be able to compete with the current supply chains of some of the big primes around the world, or their own divisions within those companies, unless we support Australian businesses. And we didn't just say, well, there we are, there's $200 billion, away you go, you know, you can compete, because they wouldn't have been able to do that. Not because they weren't good at the things that they were doing, but we're asking them to move to a whole new plane. So the Defence Industry Policy Statement, which set up the CDIC here in Adelaide, which was, of course, going to be in Canberra, but is here. The Next Generation Technology Fund, which is about $700 million, run by the DSTG here in Adelaide, and the Defence Innovation Hub. They are all operating and operating well. And they are not for the primes, although the primes do apply for funds.
We get the occasional
and you do when you're collaborating with the good Australian businesses. So
and good Australian universities.
And good Australian universities. So the idea is to build the capability, knowing that that's going to take time. I mean, you can't just go down and, you know, like go to Bunnings and get a gardening system is not the same as building a submarine or ship. So it's about building that capability for defence companies. That will take time. But I think the most important thing they can do in terms of SMEs is take those opportunities but invest in their people. Because if they attract the right people, they'll win the contracts.
Thank you. So, Chris, your main job is to deliver 9 frigates, and you're recruiting crazily to do that, and you're very busy. But then how do you then invest in research and development when you're on hook to deliver a contract?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Matt, is we're not just delivering 9 frigates, and that's the really beautiful thing about the investment and the commitment we've had from the government. We're developing a sovereign industrial naval shipbuilding capability in Adelaide and based in Adelaide, but leveraging capability from across the country, which is going to go out into perpetuity, we hope. So that's the real beauty about the sort of grand challenge in the enterprise and what we're seeking. In terms of R&D, what industry craves is certainty. So the $200 billion investment that the Commonwealth's made in terms of recapitalising the ADF fleet gives that certainty and gives industry the comfort that it needs to invest for the long term. And some of the programs that Christopher's mentioned have been fantastic in terms of fostering that collaboration and getting industry focused on the types of technology investments we need, not for the frigates that are happening now, but for the programs that are going to come in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So in my role, I have to sort of juggle two parallel streams. You know, you need the technology investment and you need the teams there that are working on the here and now, but you also need to be looking at those longer term horizons, and we do that by collaboration. We collaborate with the academic institutions. We work really closely with Defence and the Defence Science and Technology Group to understand what their future requirements are going to be and how we tailor and shape our R&D investments to match that. So, but the proof's in the pudding, and I think what you're seeing in a growing industry is companies putting their money where their mouth is. I mean, from BA Systems' perspective, we've doubled our R&D investment, and we're seeing that grow exponentially over the coming years as well. So that's where you really see the benefits of the investment.
Thank you. So Ian, just want to go back to you, please. Everyone in this room is familiar with really what's happening, but they're not the ones that are going to apply for jobs in 5 years when they're leaving school and university. And I know you're working with academic institutions in industry to understand skill sets and requirements. But what are you doing, or what has to be done through primary schools and high schools to get more students into STEM-based interests and skills, and then as they start studying trades and degrees and so forth, what are you doing, or what has to be done to spread the message wider?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. You know, we see in the Western world, and particularly in Australia, very flat engineering enrolments, flat to declining engineering enrolments over the past period. We know that the vet sector is not putting through as many candidates as we would have had in the past, and the economy is vibrant as well. These skills are needed across the other sectors that are effectively competing with the defence sector and the shipbuilding sector. So we've got to work hard at that very early stage to have people gaining an interest in careers within their sector. We've got some things here that are really to our advantage. The word continuous and the word enterprise. So Australia's doing something completely different here. We're building a continuous shipbuilding enterprise. As Chris said, we're not just building ships and submarines that you can see today and are vital to our national security. We're actually building a national enterprise. This is a nation-building program, and so we've got a tremendous opportunity to offer kids and young Australians and others in the community to come into this sector. So we need to get the message out there. We need to be talking, as I said before, to the Year 8s and Year 9s to get them to understand the opportunities that they will have if they're selecting the right courses to study in their later years in secondary school and moving into the vet sector, the certificate 3 and 4, or the tertiary sector. So part of what we're doing is an outreach. It's to really rebrand, if you like. I'm sure everybody in this room, if you think about shipbuilding, the word shipbuilding, it doesn't conjure up for you the kind of careers that we're talking about. This is a very, very high-tech sector. As I mentioned, the submarine is probably akin to the most complex machine that we will build on this planet over this period, and the frigate is not far behind that. The sophisticated systems and the integration of technology into the build process is very, very different than most people might imagine when you think of putting I like to think, we just have to put that steel around this thing to get it where it needs to go. But it's actually the capabilities, all the systems that it can provide. And so the diversity of technology careers here is really very, very exciting. So we're getting into the schools. We've got programs. We're leveraging existing channels to communicate with the students. The state governments are participating with us. The federal department's participating with us as well, so that we can provide material that will get out there into the classrooms and enable our future workforce to understand the careers. We're also looking at programs to start to educate our teachers as well. so that our teachers, and we're looking at the opportunity of bringing them together for some camps and for some education around the opportunities that this sector will provide them, so that they can do a better job of getting our future workforce excited about what they could potentially do in this sector. So it's a very, very important part of what we're doing. It's one of the focal points for me and the things that I'm thinking about on a daily basis in terms of how do we do that, how do we attract people, because for me it's incredible. They should be beating the door down trying to get onto these programs. That's how I felt in the late 80s, the early 90s when I got on the Collins program. It's incredibly exciting. We need to do a much better job of advertising at all levels within the community, but particularly for our young Australians.
Thanks. So, you mentioned I guess there's two parts to it, where the skills strategy and the Australian Industry Capability Policy is largely federal government initiatives. But Julie, coming back to a state level, could you elaborate, please, on what the state's doing to leverage these things? Maybe I know we're doing some in the skills area, but perhaps more to the defence supply chain in terms of skills readiness and making sure that we're growing them with these projects.
There's a few different initiatives we've looked at. I mentioned the skills strategy, which is more aimed at the vocational level. With industry, what we're seeing, unfortunately, from SMEs is a reluctance to bring people on and or train them until they can see the work coming through. And what we're trying to message to them is, we understand it's tough at the moment, but the reality is, A, you're going to need these people if you win the contracts here or any other industry. And the other thing is, there will be an inevitable pull towards the primes for employees, and therefore you need to overtrain. Yep. And that's a really hard thing to tell SMEs when they're still looking for work, but it needs to happen. So we're looking at ways that we can assist smaller businesses to do that. Shortly we'll be launching some scholarships that will include a little bit of help for SMEs to bring those people on at the engineering level or at the undergraduate level, and at the trades level also talking to people about flexible arrangements to bring those people on. So we do recognise it's tough. I think the primes are doing a really good job of running their programs, but we'd love to see them take more. And I think there's a couple of areas we don't think about as much, and that's adults. So that's working with TAFE to talk to them about upskilling people who are interested in working in the industry. So Ian's team has identified clearly there's a strong need for people in that sort of, I think you call it the grey collar space, we call it the light blue collar space. So higher trades, production planners, warehousing people, schedulers, I could go on. And these are roles that can be grown from people who are already in a trade, from people, we had a good example the other day, accountants can become schedulers and cost controllers with the right training. So let's not forget the people who are already in the workforce or are out of a job at the moment because of automotive or mining because of a boom or bust cycle. So making sure people think about those too. And then there's that education piece within government and schools, because we talk about talking to kids in year 8, we should be talking to kids in year 2, because some of these people will be shortly working on these projects. We're also trying to leverage the space angle, because we don't get a lot of immediate interest from particularly small children in the defence industry. It's historically a mysterious and sort of industry where we haven't talked about what we do a lot. I think that's changing. But we've found that space is such an attractor for young people, and even if we can get them thinking about a STEM education through space and AI and cyber and all the things that we see actually more women and girls flock to as well, it's a good conduit. And then when they get to university or wherever, they can decide where they want to work. But I think we shouldn't miss this opportunity to draw people in to an industry that hasn't attracted as much attention before.
Thanks, Julie. So I'd like to pick up on that jobs angle, please. Back to Christopher. Defence jobs is in the news today. Bit of debate this morning, and recent debate between Western Australia and South Australia over the full cycle docking of the Collins class. For the uninitiated, full cycle docking is pretty much the major service a submarine has every 10 years. I'm not going to ask you where you think it's going to go or where you think it should go, but I'd just like to get some insights, please. If you were in government, can you please give us some insights into how decisions like where the full cycle docking of a Collins class submarine should be located, if it have a choice between South Australia and Western Australia, how does a government make those decisions, and do you pay any attention to arguments between states?
Well, the answer to the last part of the question is no. We didn't pay any attention to arguments between states, and there's probably a lot of unsophisticated commentary around these big decisions. The insight that I can let people into with the submarines, for example, is that the real battle was not whether the submarines would be built in Adelaide, Williamtown, Henderson. It was that the submarines would be built in Australia. Because once that decision was made, they were always going to be built at Osborne. Sure, it didn't hurt me politically or the government or the South Australian Liberal members that the Liberal government made that decision, but the real battle was where are the resources and the capabilities, as I've been kind of punctuating my remarks with, and the capability was at Osborne because that's where the Collins class was built. So to recreate that submarine yard somewhere else would have been a mad decision. So the real battle was to make the decision to build them in Australia, and we did succeed in getting that decision, and that's why the submarines are being built there. So the decision around the sustainment and maintenance of the Collins class submarine will be done entirely based on the merits, and there'll be a number of different factors involved in that. None of them will be, should we share it around between the states? The decision the government made years ago was big vessels would be built in Adelaide, small vessels would be built in Henderson. Combatants basically would be built in Osborne and non-combatants in Henderson. But the first couple of offshore patrol vessels would be built here in order to keep the workforce active at Osborne until the submarines and the Hunter class were well underway. The Hunter class primarily because it's easier to get started. And those decisions were made entirely on the merits. I don't know how many people here have been to Osborne lately. I used to go to Osborne a lot. In fact, I was there the other day last week. And
you know you don't have to wear high-vis vests anymore.
I was wearing one on the other hand. I was actually, because I was there for private reasons. But the new shed for the shipyard and the submarines that's going up right now is actually bigger than the Adelaide Oval Stadium. And when you go down there, you can see how much space that is taking up. And it's great, of course. It means we're now going to go from a great shipyard to the most modern and one of the biggest in the world, one of the busiest. Now, whether the sustainment and maintenance of the Collins class is as important a priority to have at Osborne in the next 10, 20, 30 years is one of the factors that will be a decision maker for the Minister and the National Security Council. Whether there's room at Osborne, how much room will Naval Group need, and BAE, ASC for the Hunter class. What about the workforce? There's already about 200 ASC workers at Osborne doing sustainment and maintenance of the Collins class. There's about 400 at Osborne, but we're going to need 5,000 at Osborne to be able to work in that space. So these are the kinds of decisions that they'll make, and the decision will be made on the advice of the ADF, primarily the Chief of the Navy, who will take into account the preferences of the submariners, who are mostly based in Perth, of course, where the workforce is going to be available, and there'll be costs of keeping the sustainment and maintenance at Osborne, and there'll be cost of moving it to Henderson, either way, and that'll be a decision that the ministers and the NSC will make on the merits.
Thank you. So, Chris, BAE Systems has a link there in terms of you were strongly encouraged to acquire ASC Shipbuilding as part of the Hunter class project. I'd like to ask you, in terms of your strategy, so the Type 26 frigate, as you said, is being delivered to the UK, Canada, and Australia. How much, as a good Australian company, a 65-year success story, but being foreign-owned, how much autonomy does BAE Systems Australia have in your strategy locally, and how much, if any, direction or guidance do you get from the UK, given the Type 26 is a global program?
It's a good question, Matt. It's one I get asked quite a bit, and there was quite a bit of debate during the frigate program, if you recall, around overseas primes. I work for BAE Systems Australia. We're very much an Australian company. We've got an Australian CEO. We've got an Australian executive leadership team, which I sit on. And we have the best of both worlds, in effect. And I've been lucky enough over the, 13 years that I've been with BAE Systems now, which seems like an eternity. But during that time to have a great deal of autonomy in terms of how we set our strategy. You know, we run as a separate P&L. A lot of our competitors have traditionally not operated in that way. They've been marketing outposts or subsidiaries of the global company. But we've always run an Australian P&L, an Australian strategy. But having said that, we are part of a global defence company. We're the third largest defence company globally, and that gives us the ability to access fantastic technology around the world. It gives us opportunities for supply chain, for companies that we deal with here, to give them entree into an $18 billion supply chain and opportunities to supply into us globally. So I really see that as having the best of both worlds. So I set this strategy in my current role as Chief Future Business for BAE Systems Australia on an annual basis, and we look, you know, going back to your early question, 5, 10, 20 years ahead in terms of the types of investments they're making, the types of programs that we're bidding for. But we're also part of that global company, and in developing that strategy, we can look to the types of technologies that we bring in, the types of collaboration we have with the global part of the company. But every time we look to bring one of those products or one of those bits of technology into company, we're really focused on how do we then use that opportunity to build a sovereign capability in Australia. So it's not just about making a product sale, it's how do we use that as an opportunity to build a local capability in a sovereign industry. And I think that's the big cultural change that's happened over the last 5 to 6 years. And you know, we've got a lot to thank, you know, the gentleman sitting next to me here for that change in culture. But it's something that, you know, all defence companies now take to heart, and it's really part of the way we do business now.
Thank you. Thanks. We're nearly out of time, so I'm going to pose a question. I'll be asking for brief responses. And the question is, what is the biggest challenge to success of these projects and developing this capability over the next 20 years? So if you could each please give a view of what we need to get right to, in 20 years' time, look back and think that's a raging success. Ian?
Well, for me, it's the people are central. So we need the right skills and capabilities to do what we want to do in terms of building these machines to keep our nation secure. You can all help me with that, and I'm going to give you a challenge today. So we have a workforce register that is a connection point for people who want to consider jobs in this sector to register themselves, and we'll put them in connection with the right training institutions and the right companies in terms of whether they need training or they're looking for roles. You can talk to your sons and daughters, your nieces and nephews. When you go home today, there's over 200 people in this room. Ask them to register. We'll be in contact with them and talk about the fantastic careers that they can have. For me, it's all about the people and the capabilities and the knowledge that we need to generate in a sovereign manner in Australia.
Thanks, Ian. Julie?
It's workforce, for sure. I mean, I've worked in an engineering environment for a long time, and they never believed me, but I always said you can't have projects without people, you can't have products without people, you can't have AIC without the right people building the right products. So training and workforce is going to be absolutely essential to that. We need to get it right. We need to get our education levels to the right place to compete with our overseas competitors, and we need to get industry to collaborate on that.
Thank you. Chris?
Biggest challenge for me, Matt, is that, you know, we see that the job's done. You know, as far as I'm concerned, we're at the starting line now, and the challenge for us is that we seize the opportunity that's in front of us. I mean, going to Ian's point, we're hiring now. We're a growing company. We're hiring. If any of your children, grandchildren, friends, family are wanting a job in shipbuilding or wanting a job in the defence industry, come and see me afterwards, because we're in a growth industry at the moment. And similarly with supply chain, if you're a defence company, if you're in a different sector, you want to work in the defence industry, the opportunity's there, but the challenge is for us to grasp that and take it. So,
thank you. And Christopher, through good luck or good management, you get the last word.
Well, there's no doubt it's skills and workforce, because it's the area that's least controllable. Unfortunately, I mean, we can make decisions, companies can invest in research and development, you can buy steel, you can do all of those things, but trying to get a perception into the marketplace amongst grandparents and parents, quite frankly, as much as amongst young people, that shipbuilding and submarine building and the defence industry generally is a great place to have a career, even as a project manager, is this part that's intangible and difficult to control. And, you know, every story that is negative about defence in the media hurts our attempt to build the skills and workforce that we need. And it's easily the most challenging part of the job.
Thank you. Thanks. Christopher, Chris, Julie and Ian, on behalf of the room, I'd like to thank you for your contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.